On today's episode of Newsflash, we are going to take you inside the Trump campaign and how he may not be running the campaign that he needs to win. Also taking into what Biden's doing, controversy over Gretchen Whitmer, the stimulus deal, Twitter, and the Hunter Biden story, as well as the results of and a preview of the Bolivian election, all coming your way here on Newsflash. And I'm very pleased to say with us, we have back with us a long time guest coming back again, Glenn Bradford. Glenn, thank you so much for joining us. Really do appreciate it.
Oh, it's great to be on with you, Spencer.
All right. Hope you've been doing well through these coronavirus times, and are I'm sure you have been, as you always do, following the news with great focus, and that is why we always love to have you on the show. Yeah, so it has been quite a crazy time in all things the campaign, as we are now, what is it, like 20-something days away from the election, I believe at this point. Very, very close to game time here. In public, President Trump and his campaign team, they're feeling strong, projecting a sense of optimism, but there's new reporting out here is when they meet with Republican donors and state party leaders, presidential aides insist they're fully capable of achieving a close victory over Joe Biden on November 3rd, but on television and in campaign appearances, Trump and his children dismiss public polls that suggest that his prospects are bleak, and the president's calendar is packed through Election Day with rally after rally after rally. But most members of Trump's team acknowledge in private that defeat is not a far-fetched possibility. What do you see of this kind of mindset that we're hearing from the Trump team? Because I have to imagine in 2016 they didn't think anything too different, but we still had the same result, right?
Yes. I think the polling was a little different in 2016. There was more of an undecided group in 2016 that was around the 10, 11, 12% range. This time around, I think that number is much smaller. It's more like in the 5-6% range. Most people have decided who they're going to vote for and aren't going to be swayed one way or another in the remaining days. So I think the polls are say something a lot worse this time around for Trump than they did in 2016. I think the likelihood that he squeaks out a win this time is even less likely than last time. I think he was pretty lucky last time, too.
Yeah. Do you see that, like, what do you see as kind of the biggest contributing factors in that, like, hardening of support against him and kind of his inability to be in as strong a position, where I definitely think he could have been in a pretty strong position if he'd handled some certain things right? What do you think kind of caused him to dig himself the hole as to where he is today?
Well, I think generally the electorate has been able to see him behave as president, whereas in 2016 they hadn't. Mm-hmm. And he's also running against someone who has much higher favorability ratings, Biden versus Clinton. I think a lot of the votes he got in 2016 were simply anti-Clinton votes. But more specifically, the coronavirus epidemic is really what's killing him, and his handling of that, I think, across the board is seen pretty negatively, particularly by suburban women and a lot of independents. And there's not much he can do at this point to change their minds about that. I think what he could have done better was to try to stress the great economy that we had before the pandemic took hold, and that he probably could make a convincing argument that he could bring that economy back once they got the pandemic in check. But he hasn't been campaigning very well, and he hasn't been able to get that message across.
Yeah, I think that really is going to come in really handy with a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about later, especially with regards to the stimulus here. But there is some kind of interesting stuff for these people who really kind of attach themselves to Trump. and are now dealing with the process of the kind of long period, the long Republican Party Trump high is getting over. The 5-year ride is coming to an end. And people who have really, for their own political sake, have had to hitch themselves to Trump are now starting to think about possibly needing to unhitch themselves and then re-enter the kind of normal world again where Trump isn't a big factor. Maybe we will have someone like Trump rise up in the Republican Party and take a lot of that energy and fill that void. But I think it's really interesting to see people and I do want to talk about kind of first the people directly associated with Trump, then first his enablers, then we'll talk about maybe more the people directly associated with Trump. A comment that kind of caught my eye was John Conran, senator of Texas, really saying that he was very, very, very critical of Trump. John Kelly saying things like he's the biggest failure of a person or something I've ever met. Just really people who are kind of in some ways still very much associated with him. Just not really very not speaking very flatteringly of him at all. What do you make of those comments from some of those two high-profile GOP Johns?
Yeah, right. And we also saw a conveniently leaked phone conversation by Ben Sasse to some of his constituencies, which were, scathing criticism of Trump. And also we saw Mitt Romney come out and say some things last week. So yeah, you're definitely starting to see some cracks. It's not like a floodgate is opened yet, but there are certain politicians who kind of see the writing on the wall, and they're already starting to try to distance themselves from Trump. But I think that the Supreme Court nomination has made that even more difficult because Republicans have to kind of, toe the line until that vote is done, and that should be very close to the election. And I don't really see too many more negative things being said about him. That's just my sense.
Yeah, but I really do think it's going to kind of be an interesting process. Do you see people do you think Kelly and people like Conran, Senator Conran, who have really played deep roles in helping Trump get his worst policies done, what kind of role do you think they will play in kind of a post-Trump Republican Party and post-Trump political sphere?
I don't know. I haven't really thought about that too much. It's hard for me to imagine someone taking a real about face once he loses, just because of the hypocrisy of it all. But I see over time that might, and I think that if the Senate in particular is hit really hard in the 2020 elections, and if say something like 7 seats get flipped in the Senate. Something disastrous like that for the Republican Party, then I got to see some changes in Republican philosophy about how they're going to try to politically hold together as a party, because they're really struggling right now. They're right on the verge of kind of going full-blown autocracy with Trump, versus having to be forced back into a more moderate position politically to try to compete with Democrats, because it's just not working for them right now unless they can, pull off some kind of, autocratic move here with Trump and somehow steal this election, which would just be, the horror story. But I hope that doesn't happen.
Yeah, that's definitely going to be something. I think that it's really kind of a scary testament to the times that we are in, of how frighteningly real a scenario like that is. But what I do think is it's going to be very interesting to take a look at what the Republican Party kind of chooses to do in a post-Trump world. Will they distance themselves? Will people be trying to claim the mantle of Trumpism? Will they be trying to paint themselves as the next Trump? Or will they look to take the party in a new direction? And I think a good bit, because we do forget, there are a lot of people who, just staffers, mid-level campaign aides on the Hill. They've apparently already been inquiring about employment on Capitol Hill after the election, apparently under the assumption that there will not be a second Trump administration for them to serve in. It is not clear how appealing, though. This is the thing. It's not clear how appealing the Trump campaign might be as a resume line for private sector employers. And do you see it as being a attractive line for a primary for these kind of employers, like people like, for example, Kirsten Nielsen? She was speaking at Harvard even after, I do believe this is so, I may have to double check, but she had some pretty big speaking engagements. Tom Spicer, they for after all the horrible things they've done in the Trump administration, have been able to kind of get these lucrative private sector positions in academia or whatever the case may be. Do you think that they will or maybe even should get those positions, whoever they may be, if they contribute in some way in the Trump administration or campaign?
Well, I mean, certainly I have my own private opinion. I can't see how people would want to hire these people. But for whatever reason, maybe it's because the Trump base is so fired up about Trumpism that gives these people some magic aura about them. But if Trump loses, what happens to his base? I think that's kind of like the question you're really asking me. It all remains to be seen whether a new leader in the Republican Party can quickly rise up and take hold of the base, and whether that's going to be someone who's Trump-like or someone who's, say, more like Romney or John McCain was. That's all kind of speculative. But right now, I think there's a lot of Republicans who are teetering on the fence about, leaving the party, or maybe have left already, just because they can't stomach what's going on in the Republican Party. And I'm sure there's certain Republican, senators, for example, who had presidential hopes in 2016 that might try it again in the next cycle. And by then, who knows what the Republican base will be like.
Yeah, I think that definitely the Republican base certainly is subject to change, and it's kind of hard to see them going in any kind of a positive direction anytime soon, just based on some of the trends, right? So, I do think it's very interesting to just kind of like delve in here a little bit about the campaign that Trump's been running. And a lot of people, a lot of Republican consultants especially, this is again David Kochel talking to the New York Times, saying Republican consultants are frustrated because we want the president's campaign to be laser focused on the economy. Their best message is Trump built a great economy and COVID-19 damaged it, and Trump is a better option than Biden restore it. And do you think that if he put that message in the right way, and there was if there was some sort of real effort being put in place to make it look like he actually cared about the economy and not just himself, do you think that could be kind of a convincing message? Because I certainly think that he still could have, even against kind of a weaker candidate like Joe Biden, dug himself out of a hole like this.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes to what I was saying before. His campaign message is not, I mean, he is saying stuff like that about the economy. It's not like he's completely ignoring the economy. He knows that's his strong point. But he seems to get too sidetracked during these rallies. He's constantly complaining about his political enemies and saying, outrageous stuff. And he just doesn't have a laser-focused message like he had in 2016. He had all these catchphrases, whether you loved them or hated them. He was constantly drilling that into the electorate. And he was getting tremendous amount of media coverage, free media coverage besides, which he's not getting now. But yes, and answer your question, absolutely. If he was more laser focused about the economy, I think he'd be doing better. I still think he'd be losing, but I think he'd be doing better.
Yeah. And he makes a great point here. He says, our base love the stuff about Hunter Biden, laptops, and Mayor Giuliani, but they're already voting for Trump. And I think if you really want to make a difference, if you really want to make a difference in people's lives, especially as an incumbent who's landed themselves in such a disastrous economic situation, I think you got to show how you plan to get America out of the hole.
Yeah, I mean, he can say that, his economy bona fides are better than Biden's, and people might buy that. But he doesn't really have a plan for anything he wants to do in the next